Okay, good afternoon. This session is entitled Disruptive Business, and it's the environment surrounding the NRENs in which they operate is changing. So in this session we will have three contributions which highlight how NRENs are adapting to this changing environment around them. We have Dave Wilson from HANet, Christoph Witzig from Switch, and Celso Capovilla from RMP. So we're going to get a nice mix and match of experiences in this area. So first up, I invite Dave Wilson from HANet. Dave actually graduated here in UCD. He also started his work at HANet here in UCD, and one of his first tasks was to manage the move out of UCD, which apparently went so well that nobody noticed that it happened, which is obviously, in networking terms, a fantastic achievement. But over to Dave on his perspective on disruptive business.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Disruption is a word that gets really badly abused in our industry. It's almost as badly abused as the word cloud. And it turns out it's an academic term with a very specific meaning. And I think it's happening to NRENs right now. And I'd like to explain what it means. And to explain what it means, I'm going to tell 4 stories, 5 minutes each. Should give us about 10 minutes for questions. And the first story is about hard disks. Now, why hard disks? Well, a researcher in Harvard Business School called Clayton Christensen, and he wanted to understand why good businesses fail. Perfectly good businesses run very well according to all the management theory at the time were failing. And he had a friend who was a geneticist who said, if you want to study genetics, you don't study human beings, they live too long. If you want to study genetics, you study fruit flies, they die quickly, you get lots of data. And if you want to find something in the technology sector that dies quickly, look at hard disk manufacturers. So he wrote this book. This book, The Innovator's Dilemma, is an excellent book. I really recommend it. As business books go, it's a page-turner. And what he discovered when he analysed the data, he went through a few theories, and he finally came to the conclusion that there are 2 distinct types of innovation. And they're quite concrete. If you have a graph with 2 axes, time and some quality, let's say capacity of a hard disk, then if you look at, for example, the 8-inch hard drive, when that came out, it came out with a certain capacity and it increased over time. Why did it increase? It's because the manufacturers, the vendors were innovating and they were changing the technology, and they had to do that. The reason they had to do that was the customers were demanding improvements. Their demands were also rising over time. And their customers were, basically, they were a digital equipment corporation. It was the makers of mini computers, were the customers of 8-inch hard drives. And that was all very well. And then and those innovations were what we call sustaining innovations, because every single one was better than what came before. And then along comes the 5.25-inch hard drive, and that's worse. It's got lower capacity, it's more expensive per byte, it's slower. Why would anyone want this? It's worse than what came before. And why would anyone want that is actually the $64,000 question, because it turns out that all these companies making the 8-inch hard drives, who should have been very well placed to make these 5.25-inch hard drives, couldn't do it. And the reason they couldn't do it wasn't that they were technically incapable. It's that their business was all structured around the 8-inch drive. Their engineers who were on the 5.25-inch drive projects kept getting pulled away to fight fires for the large customers. And their salespeople had Rolodexes full of existing customers who were saying, we don't want these, keep doing what you're doing. And their management and finance people were looking at this business and going, why do we even want to get involved in this? The margins are lower, it makes us look bad. Stick to what we're good at. And so the entire area of 5.25-inch drives was basically left unexplored and was left to new entrants to try and follow. And those new entrants didn't have a hope of getting anywhere with the mini computer makers, so they had to find their own market. And that market turned out to be personal computers. Now, immediately we can see what's going on here, because of course the PC market became far bigger than mini computers ever were. But it's even worse than that, because those manufacturers who found this new whole class of system, a new class of customer, got their own sustaining innovations. And they started to get not better than the 8-inch drive, but good enough. And at that point, the 8-inch drive market disappears very, very quickly. The old market was disrupted, and it's too late to react. So the defining feature of a disruptive innovation is that it's worse in some way than what came before. Better in some ways, but worse in others. The big deal is that it doesn't actually compete directly with what's already there, which is why it's so difficult for the incumbents to deal with and why it's so difficult for them to react or even notice that it's going on. What it does is it changes the basis on which competition takes place. So it changed the basis of competition in this case. The 5.25-inch drive changed the basis of competition away from mini computers and toward personal computers. And what the incumbents tend to do in that case, when they start to know something is going on, is they try to improve their product. This is called fleeing up market. And what happens is they try to get better and better at what they're already good at and satisfy their existing customers more. And it doesn't work, because all you're doing is increasing the distance between what you're doing now and your customers' expectations. And when you do that, usually your costs are also going up. And it doesn't save you when eventually the customer expectations reach this point. That's called fleeing up market, and two things happen at that point. One is that the new market becomes vastly bigger than the old, and the other is that the old customers become happy with the new technology. And at that point you're disrupted. It's too late to act. This happened well outside what we think of as the traditional technology sector. This happened, JCB was a disruptive innovation, mechanical diggers, because JCBs used hydraulic pulled buckets instead of cable pulled. And if you look at this and squint, you can kind of see why Microsoft is willing to annoy all its existing customers with Windows 8. That's my first story. Second story is about mobile phones. Why mobile phones? Well, we have all these new users and all these new devices on our networks. How important are they? Can we measure how important they are? The phone as a sort of Wi-Fi client is pretty recent. It was on phones before 2007, but really it was the iPhone that kicked this off. It's sort of the Archduke Ferdinand of mobile, as far as I'm concerned. And next month is 7 years since the iPhone first came out. And it's clear that these things are not just small PCs. They're behaving in a different way. Benedict Evans has these graphs. And this one, he compares them to tablets. This is sales of PCs, split in two, which is a little unfair, but corporate and consumer, versus tablets. And you see PCs are leveling off, and tablets are rising. And then he goes, what about smartphones? How do these compare to smartphones? And smartphones are just out there. They're way bigger than either of the others ever were, and bigger than them put together. And the question is, how big can this get? Well, we actually know how big it's going to get, because it's pretty clear that very soon all mobile phones will be smartphones. And mobile phones look like that. And that's how big smartphones are going to get. And look what's happening to PCs. PCs, which are so important to us, look at the size of them. They're starting to go down. They're still selling, and they're going to keep selling. But the new jobs that are being done by other things. The touch interface has turned out to be unbelievably attractive and suitable for all sorts of new applications that never really quite worked on the old devices. That's the industry in general. What about us? How important are mobile users to us as NRENs? And how many are there? Well, we can actually tell this, because with EduRoam, we see the MAC addresses of devices on our customers' networks. And from the MAC address, we can tell the manufacturer of the Wi-Fi chipset, and from that, we have a fair idea of what the device is. And it comes out like this. At the bottom, we have things that are almost certainly laptops. And at the top, we have things that I'm pretty sure are mobile phones or tablets. And in the middle, you've got Apple. Big chunk that's just Apple. What can you do with that? Well, what we need to do is try and estimate the installed base. And it turns out Apple are actually very transparent about the amount of devices they sell and which devices they sell. And you can look at the sales figures over 10 years, which I did, pull them out. And you can go, okay, so chances are a phone will last about 2 years because they're probably on a contract. Tablet, probably about 3 years, but they're only about 3-4 years old anyway. And let's assume a laptop or a desktop goes for 5 years. And it comes out like this. And that gives you a difference, an installed base, based on their sales, of 86% mobile and everything else laptop and desktop. But that's only a model. You have to try and verify this. So I spoke to my friends and colleagues in UCD because I know they have data on their own networks, the DHCP networks, and say, what are you seeing? And they came back and they said, well, it's not precise because some devices have 2 Ethernet cards, but it comes out, if you fudge it by about 30% for those devices, it comes out about 6.5 to 1, which I realized is 86%. So I consider the model verified. And if you apply that back to what we see in EduRoam, it looks like this. Above that line is mobile, below that line is laptop and desktop. The vast majority of the devices that we see using EduRoam are mobiles. They're tablets or they're phones. As a percentage of all devices over time, it looks like this. Laptop versus mobile is dropping. It's continuing to drop. But what's the disruption here? What's the big deal? Aren't these just in addition to laptops? Aren't they just extra devices that people are carrying around and they still have the laptops? The percentage is hiding that. Well, yes, the laptops are still there. But remember what we saw a moment ago. The big deal with the new devices is they're doing new jobs. They're competing not with the existing incumbent, but with non-consumption. They're doing new things before they come back into the old. And they're good at something that isn't being done yet, and then they move up market. If you're not happy with your tablet as a laptop replacement, that's because they're not a laptop replacement yet. But do we want to rely on user expectations never reaching this point? Maybe they won't. Maybe they will. So at this point, when I was preparing this talk a few months ago, I was going to ask people a question: who here has heard of WhatsApp? And unfortunately, everyone has heard of WhatsApp. Because Facebook went and paid $16 billion for WhatsApp. But what I found fascinating about it was, who here heard of WhatsApp before Facebook paid $16 billion for it last February? Good chunk of you. Who of you heard about it from a relative who's non-technical? Who didn't? Who found it through some other means? Far fewer of you. This is a mainstream application that completely passed the technical people by. That's the first time I've seen it. It's probably not the first time it happened, but it's the first time I really became aware of it. And what it leads to is people like me can't understand why that company is worth $16 billion. But the best comment I saw on this, I think it was Ben Baharan said this, maybe Ben Thompson said, it's clear that Mark Zuckerberg knows the difference between Facebook the product and Facebook the business, and they're two very different things. That's my second story. Third story. These are right slides. Okay, this is more of a parable. Where I work, we have a paper towel dispenser in the bathroom, and you're not supposed to just pull the towels because that's unhygienic. You're meant to wave your hands under a sensor, and then it slowly dispenses not enough towel. Then you wave your hands again, and nothing happens, and you kind of yank at it, and it gets very silly. And I was standing behind a colleague who was doing this dance and struggling with it, and he said, "It has one job." And I said, yes, its job is to stop you taking all the paper towels. The thing about jobs to be done is these are actually the fundamental unit of disruption. And sometimes the job to be done is not what you think the job actually is. The job of a mobile phone is not to be a device with a radio and a speaker and all the best of these. It's communication on the move. It's reachability on the move. The job of an aeroplane is not to have engines and to fly you. It's to get you from one city to another. And if you're going from London to Paris, maybe a train will do that better. So the jobs to be done of NRENs is very interesting. And as Roberto said, 20 years ago I was sitting in these benches. 22 years ago I was sitting there, I was standing here. I graduated, went to work for HEANF, and over that time my understanding of the job to be done by an NREN has changed significantly. Because 18 years ago, when I joined, we were building this network, and I thought our job was to build a network and to do routing, and it wasn't. The job at the time was to be a procurement and delivery vehicle for internet connectivity. And it kind of didn't matter how we did that, but the network turned out to be the most efficient way to do that. 13 years ago, we started deploying IPv6, and I thought our job was to get IPv6 and new technologies out there. And every time I tried, I came up against the question, what's the business case? Couldn't get my head around it. Did not have a good answer. Didn't understand why I was even being asked it. 10 years ago, we were deploying MPLS point-to-points. We were rolling out our point-to-point network, and I thought that this is the job to be done. It wasn't. It was off-site connectivity. It was connecting outlying campuses. And anytime I wanted to have a conversation about it, I got the answer back, look, this is too technical. And I couldn't get my head around that either. I need to talk DMARCs, I need to talk protocols. Can I have someone who's technical, please? And 7 years ago, when we were deploying our core routers, which I thought the job was, okay, these can take a ton of 10 gig interfaces if I'm going to need them. And I was driving John Boland nuts because he was asking, what do they do that's new? And my answer was something like, well, they won't melt when we put more traffic through them. Is that what you want? And it wasn't. I wasn't getting it. And these questions, it turns out, were indicators of the job to be done. And the fact that I didn't have answers meant I was missing it. I wasn't seeing it. These DMARCs aren't mine to choose, not even the NRENs to choose. The customer is paying the money, and of course they get to decide that, and they can choose to go somewhere else. So I'm looking at the job to be done now, and I wonder what else could do it. We all know this graph by Kees de Laat, and it's excellent, and it's very, very powerful, because I look at this and I go, what could mobile do to us? And this shows it. If we bring in mobile here, right now mobile has a limited amount of bandwidth, a limited amount of reliable connectivity, and there's a certain number of users on our networks that will be satisfied by it. And many of those just use that, perhaps instead of connecting to Wi-Fi. But as it gets better, what happens? With LTE, you're looking at considerably more bandwidth. And a relatively small increase in bandwidth can affect a disproportionate amount of users. And if we find ourselves in a situation where companies are coming out with laptops or devices that have 12 or 18-hour battery life and SIM cards in them, and students are going to the mobile phone stores in September and they're being sold these devices and they're being told for $100 extra or 100 euros extra or whatever currency you like, I'll give you the SIM card and you put it in and I'll give you all the connectivity you like and you won't have to worry about unreliable Wi-Fi. Don't care whether it's reliable or not, they just hear those words. What could that do to us? How do we sustain the C users in that environment? Because we've lost most of our users, and all the ones we're left with are the really demanding, expensive ones. How do we run that sort of network? I don't know. And that's what I'd like to discuss with you. And it brought me back to when I was first in this theatre on my first day of college, and a gentleman was standing here and said, I see the university as a stool with 3 legs, staff, students and researchers. And he said, if you lose any one of these, the stool falls. And what happens to us if one of those legs goes away? Which sounds kind of hopeless. I mean, if disruption is so hard to see, and then it just happens and it's over, it seems like there's nothing we can do. Unless... Because, of course, these 3 stories weren't really about those things. The first one is about the definition of disruptive innovation. The second is about competing with non-consumption. The third is about jobs to be done. And the fourth is how it affects us. Because disruption is not always inevitable. And even when it is, there's things you can do. You can do it to yourself. There's 2 things that you need to be able to do to be able to handle that scenario. You need to be aware of the warning signs, and you need to be ready to act to disrupt yourself. When it comes to awareness, I think, and I may be wrong about this, I think the interesting thing is mobile. I think it's pretty serious, very, very interesting right now. There's some fascinating stuff being written about it, a lot of rubbish being written about it, some fascinating stuff being written about it. So I follow these guys. This is how I keep up with what's going on. So step 1, as far as I'm concerned, is follow these guys on Twitter. Sorry, no. Step 1 is get on Twitter. Step 2 is follow these guys. They will lead you to others. You will agree with some, you will disagree with others. And then they also have blogs where they write less frequently but very interesting stuff. They have podcasts. The top one in particular, if I go running, I just put on The Critical Path and I forget I'm running. I wake up 45 minutes later. And that at least is a start for understanding what's going on, because some very interesting stuff going on and a lot of it's non-obvious, and there's some very smart thinkers out there writing about it. And the other half is about getting there first and disrupting ourselves. And here I kind of come back to Apple, because Apple has done this a couple of times to themselves. And it's something that's usually very difficult for a company, particularly a large company, to do. When they, in 2006, when the iPod was at the height of its popularity, Bill Gates said, it's okay, Microsoft hasn't managed to compete here, but it's fine, because very soon people will be listening to music on their mobile phones. And he was quite correct. And that's normally the sort of situation where the incumbent with the iPod or the music player finds it very difficult to deal with it. And what did they do? Apple basically killed the iPod business. The iPod business is now basically dead. There's very few being sold. And they did that. They were only able to do that because they decided to cut it loose and let the iPhone take over, which is what it did. They've done it again with the iPad and the Mac, because when the iPad was released, and it was a relatively cheap device, certainly at the time, they had questions from investors going, aren't these things going to cannibalize sales of your Mac laptops? And their answer was, yes, it will, but it's also going to cannibalize sales of PCs, and we're comfortable with that. And Zuckerberg in Facebook knows the difference between Facebook's product and its business. And he's willing to abandon one, ultimately, it looks like, in order to save the other. And we can handle this too, but we can't handle it by fleeing up market. If we keep trying to compete at the high end and keep improving the top of what we do, then we run the risk that we saw earlier of the hard disk manufacturers. If we keep appealing to the highest possible quality, we have to keep being the highest possible quality, but it's not sufficient. I think a lot of the answer here is we need to be quicker at getting stuff out the door. I'm looking at the new idea forums for Géant, and it takes a long time where I have an idea from a customer, which I had last November and some last year, and it takes a couple of years to turn that into a JRA, perhaps a service activity, and ultimately to get to the user. And maybe someone else will do something better than that in the meantime, or maybe it just won't matter as much anymore. I think we have to be dynamic enough to eat into our own here and prepare to do things that are worse. Not shoddy workmanship, but away from the high tech sometimes, and away from the pinnacle of our technology. Sometimes we have to move away from that in order to serve people better. And that's how we avoid being disrupted, by doing it to ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. So any questions for Dave?
There's a free gift if you ask a question, so if you're thinking about it, please do.
Hi, Simon Leinen, Switch. Thanks, great talk. Actually, I think we should take these things seriously. Also, what I would offer is that we're actually doing a very good service to the people coming with these new devices by offering them wonderful Wi-Fi capability, and I guess many of these non-technical people learn that they can do stuff at school that they can't do on the road or at home for cost or speed reasons. And I think we're already providing something very that makes these devices even more powerful. But we're not seeing that, right? Yeah. We're not even. I don't know. It's. I guess in many of our minds, it's not what we're. Not our job to do or whatever. I think just these things we could, by thinking more proactively about these kinds of disruption, we could make ourselves much more useful. For example, EduRoam is something super useful that has been not understood very well by most of us operators. But when you talk to researchers, like disproportionately more popular than all the other stuff we are putting so much work in. I'm sure that there are other jewels that we're doing, but it's probably requires some rethink of what we can do to enable people.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
And also why I was reminded it was you were talking about the LTE thing, and that is that reminds me that in our community this 3G, 4G, 5G thing is always brought up as something we should be working on. And personally, I see much less promise in that compared to the lowly wireless LAN things that we have. So I don't know. I don't understand. It's too low tech, probably.
My thinking there is I think there's danger in hitching ourselves too much to one technology. Eduroam is wonderful and actually might be what gets us out of this. But also, I don't know how important Wi-Fi will be in 5-10 years if LTE is just great. So I sort of fear that. And that, of course, the coverage of Eduroam it's outside NREN's control. It seems very important to us, but it's also outside our control. So I don't know how good the experience is in one location compared to another. Something I can do. But thank you very much. Have a book. Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully no presents, Dave. But one remark about LTE and Wi-Fi. I think they are complementary to one another.
Sure.
Wi-Fi is great for indoor. Don't try to use their LTE. LTE is great for outdoors.
Fair enough.
But regarding the disruptiveness of mobility, I fully agree with you that this is something that NREN should look into. In the end, mobile data is just data looking for a wire.
Yeah.
Mobile data is something they're searching for wires. So we already have the wired infrastructure. So I don't think the mobile connectivity is such disruptive as you presented before. I think it's an added value of something. We already have the wire. So it's the last mile that we do it wireless.
I think if I have a fear, it's because we've made wires too easy. We know how to do wires now, and other people know how to do wires now. So if all we're providing now is a wire, what's the point in having us? What is it that we're adding? There's perhaps nothing so special when it comes to education and research with having a particular kind of wire, depending on who provides it. So on one level I agree, but on another I think there's something we need to look out for there to make sure that we're not just replaced by something that's really quite boring.
Yeah,
thank you.
From my perspective, the real killer thing is when NRENs have their own mobile network code, such that we can make our own SIMs.
Right.
There, when that happens, well, it's going to be fast.
Great. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm afraid the bad news is that's the last book, but oh no, please.
That's okay. I'd be happy to carry it home anyway. I thought this was really interesting because normally we think of as NRENs as disrupting commercial carriers, and this is a good way to flip it around. I guess one advantage I would point to for NRENs is in some ways we have the perfect customer base. They're young and they're not settled into their habits yet. And they're fast to adopt new technology, and our entire customer base turns over into more young people every 4 years, essentially. And so, one of the strengths that an NREN ought to have is the fact that they can essentially refresh their entire customer base to the eagerest adopters of new technology on a regular basis. And so I guess I might ask for how you think that advantage can be used to the benefit as you look at the commercial vendors providing a disruptive influence as well.
I think it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. You're absolutely correct that we have that advantage. So do other people who might be in a position to capture it. But I don't know. I can't see the future in this, and this is exactly the sort of question I'd like to raise with the rest of the audience, and perhaps later in the event to discuss. I don't have really great concrete ideas, or I have some, but they're harebrained, and I think we need to refine that and look closer at it.
It's Alex Reed from ARNet. Thank you for your presentation, Dave.
Thank you.
Some people claim that the NRENs will be put out of business by commodity internet when it gets faster and more reliable and so on. So that may be the disruption that will happen to NRENs. You said that the best way to deal with them is to do it yourself. So what's your recommendation to NRENs to put ourselves out of business, or to anticipate that disruption?
I think it comes back to the difference between the business and the product. I do look at how much transit costs these days, and it kind of scares me on two levels. One is it's really quite cheap from anyone these days, and the other is if they're charging this little, what on earth are they doing with our packets? But I think, I mean, like I said, it's necessary but not sufficient to pursue the highest quality technology, the highest quality connectivity. We have users like that who we must serve. But almost all the work I see, certainly in Géant land, seems to be centered around that. Whereas the job to be done that I'm hearing from my customers are teaching and learning. And I think if we focus a lot more on that and we pay more attention to that, then I think that we can make ourselves invaluable there in a way that we aren't right now.
Okay, thanks Dave, and thanks for the questions as well. So next up we have Christoph Witzig from Switch. Christoph has been for many years at Switch, and he is responsible for the services that Switch delivers to the IT departments of Swiss universities.
Where do you have the...
You just speak there, yes.
Oh, here. Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you. I've one... No, that's... Is it not coming here? Ah, great. Okay, thanks. So the title of my talk is All NRENs are Local, a business case for NRENs. And if you expect now a silver bullet of a strategy how you implement the business case that's going to save your business for the next 10 years and going to make you happy, then I have to disappoint you. I decided to rather give a personal presentation on various things that are ongoing at Switch. We have a new strategy for the last few years. I'm going to talk about them, and I'm also going to add it with some personal comments. And following up on Roberto's comment, my main job at Switch is that I'm responsible for the services that Switch offers to the IT departments of the Swiss universities. And obviously, I'm going to put that a lot into my talk, and I try to also show you a little bit what's going on our end, on the customer, on our end, and how that influences us. So I have a very short introduction, and then in the main part, I tell you a bit more about our strategy that was formulated in 2011, some of the work and some of the issues that we've had over the last 3 years. And then I try to condense that to 5 key facts that I think are relevant for all NRENs and conclude. So the title of my talk, All NRENs are Local, is a pun. It's a pun on a famous quote from this man. He used to be actually Irish-American, a politician, was in Congress for 35 years. And the quote is, all politics is local. And what Tip O'Neill wanted to say with this is that for a politician, first and foremost, he has to be aware that his voter, his local constituencies, vote according to their local issues. So in other words, the performance and state of the local school in the school district of a voter is way more important than the overall state of the education in the country, because people in the end will vote according to local issues. Now, I take this onto the NREN world, and in my view, the most important thing for NRENs are really what's happening with their constituencies, the universities for whom NRENs are supposed to serve. That's one aspect, and I think that's the most important aspect. There's another aspect where the local character of NREN comes in, namely, in the end, we're organizations, we have been founded in a certain legal setup, we're financed in a certain way, and that is actually a way that varies from country to country. So in that sense, also the kind of business that we pursue, the kind of options that we have or we may not have, is really also determined by local factors. So now coming to Switch. I think the story of Switch is very typical for many NRENs. We've been founded in the late 80s. Then we established a network in the 1990s in Switzerland for education and research. We've been very successful at that. And then in the first 10 years of 2000 to 2010, we were really unchallenged network provider in academia. Switch already during that time started to build up an authentication and authorization infrastructure, which has been very successful. And over the last few years, we've also been ventured into collaborative support for collaboration, e-learning, grid, and other activities in the academic sector. So it's actually a success story. It's a success story like almost all NRENs are success stories. And I think the question today is that enough? So we have a very strong hold on the network. Switch has a very strong hold on AAI. What's going to happen with those two services? Those are very mature services. On the network, we have competition from commercial providers, and they have economies of scales that are very impossible for us to match. And on the AAI, we have succeeded in Switzerland to build up an AAI that connects every university. But what's there the next thing? And these sort of things then led Switch into the strategy that was made in 2011. It's called Strategy 2020. So the starting point, so to say, is this plot. It's the market model of Switch. What you see on the right-hand side are the universities. From our perspective, there are lecturers, there's researchers, there's the IT services, there's university management and administration. And if we look at the services that are being offered, they're in black arrows, then you see Switch has a very thick arrow to the IT services. And of course what that reflects is that we provide the network for the universities. That means we provide the network connectivity and work together with the network engineers of the campus. What you also see is the magenta arrows. These are the finances. And of course what you see is also that Switch is being paid for its services, above all directly from the universities. And the third thing that you sort of see is that there's a few very thin arrows from Switch also to researchers and lecturers. We have some services which we actually give directly to lecturers and researchers, but they're actually, in terms of volume, much smaller than what the network or AAI would be. And also those services are typically charged through the IT services of the university. Well, that market model then also led Switch to ask, where is the growth opportunity that we have in the next few years? And the approach is that the main growth comes from providing services to researchers and lecturers. And that, of course, raises a couple of questions, namely 4. First of all, what kind of services are the services that you can provide? Second, who is really going to use those services? When you talk about lecturers and researchers, that's actually maybe not just a very homogeneous group. So your services, you have to really understand what these people need. And you also have to know how you approach them. Thirdly, I mentioned the important role of the IT service departments. Obviously, they have also a role in it, or do they not have a role in it? And what are they going to say about it? And last but not least, what does that mean for Switch? So I'm going to now talk in the next few slides on those 4 questions. The first question, when you want to provide new services, when you want to provide new value, then I think it's good to step back and ask the question whether your environment has changed in a way very drastically from the last time you developed big, successful services. And I think it has. Today, we have a lot of providers that offer free services. Students enter already the university and they're highly literate. It's not that they enter university and they're excited about getting an email address, because they already have 5 at least of them. So in other words, for an NREN, it's really impossible to compete on price. because the other providers that are out there, they have economies of scales that we don't have, even if we do it on a very, very large international basis. Second, and I'm going to come to that later in the talk, is also that the role of the IT service department changes within the organizations. We also have to consider that. And thirdly, we also have to be aware, if we start to build and offer new services, then eventually we have to also ask the question, what happens with the existing services? Are they still worth running? Do they still do a good job? Or do we just run them because we've been running them for a long time? Now, maybe I can give you a few examples of services that we have started over the last few years since we made our strategy at Switch. I mentioned here a few examples. One is a working group of the Switch legal department with the legal department of the university, so on IT, legal IT issues. So that's something that's very new for us. Then we also have developed a service procurement. This is a service that focuses on currently on procuring licenses for all the universities. And that's a service that's still in the beginning. There's now 2 people employed, but if you look at other NRENs, for instance, like Surf Market, you see there's a huge potential there for NRENs to become active. And then another very important service that we identified as part of the strategy is a very long-lived academic user ID for long-lived learning, meaning that a student currently has an AAI account, but if he leaves a university, then he loses his identity. With this identity, he can carry it through his academic life. And actually, there has been a talk just half an hour ago in another session by Christoph Graf. You may want to see the slides or his cast. And finally, we have also had, we're now commissioning a new service based on the own cloud, which we call Academic Dropbox. So I think there's a fair amount of services out there that you can actually find need at the university. And I think the feedback we got on those services has been very good. Now I come to the second question. If you want to provide directly services to users, you really have to understand them. And then the question is also, how do you approach these user groups which you have not been approaching in the past? How do you do that? What do those people want? And here I think we have to also change how we do how we operate, how we do our business. In the past, very often, people had a great technical idea, they built a service, and then they were looking for the people to use the service. And I think that doesn't run and that doesn't work anymore in this model. What I want to say is that an NREN should become more business-oriented in the sense that it takes the tools and methods that commercial companies already use, we can capitalize on them. But I think here there's 2 things that are important. First of all, that does not mean we abandon our technical knowledge. On the contrary, we augment the technical knowledge with business skills that we currently lack in order to develop new services. And secondly, I think it does also not mean that NREN employees appear like salespersons in universities. Because universities have a different culture. And I think it would be very bad for NRENs to be perceived as commercial software providers that try to sell you a lot of licenses. So obviously here, the art will be to find a good balance between the way we have been operated in the past and the way commercial companies operate. I'm also going to come back to that point later on. Again, a few examples from Switch. We had a reorganization at Switch. Before that reorganization, our company was structured in departments and various services were in different departments. What that meant is, for instance, for somebody from an IT service department, that if he had an issue with the network, he dealt with the department that the network was in. If he had the problem with AAI, well, that was in another department. These were other people. You can easily imagine that communication between departments is very hard in almost every company, including Switch. So as part of this reorganization, we grouped departments according to user groups, meaning all the services who had a primary thrust on the IT service department were in one Switch department. And I think that has been rather beneficial for the customer, because for them it's much clearer to which is his contact point. In addition, it has also the benefit that the communication between the teams running those services, meaning, for instance, the AAI, the PKI, the network team, is much more stronger at Switch. So we have weekly meetings. So if something happens in a university, we much sooner, the other teams learn much sooner about it. So that's an additional benefit. And last but not least, it's also important that that way we can cover the entire hierarchy, in the sense that the network people talk with the network teams, the leader of the network team talks with the leader of the network teams in the universities, and the CEO of Switch and myself talk to the IT leaders, so of the service departments of the university. So you really can cover that way the entire hierarchy of the university, and I think that has actually helped. In addition, one thing that universities definitely appreciate is that they have the direct contact to the people responsible for the services, and that's also guaranteed in this model. Another thing which we feel is important for NRENs is that we do also consider non-technical services if there's a need at the university. And I gave you 2 examples in the previous slide, namely the procurement activity as well as the legal, the IT legal working group. And finally, a third thing that we did is that we looked at our existing services and tried to better understand them and quantify them, what they're doing, and that's what I mean by the service portfolio. So I'm going to show you the service portfolio method in the next slide. So the approach that we have chosen is that we try on one hand for every service to measure how attractive is the market where this service is. So that's something that's given externally. It's a characteristic of the market. It's independent of us. On the other axis, we look if we have a service, how good are we at this service, or how competitive is our service compared to other offerings in the marketplace. And then, of course, you can plot one versus the other. And what you end up with is on the top right corner, sort of the land of milk and honey, where it's a really attractive market and you're really strong and good at it. And at the bottom left is sort of probably the valley of tears, where you bringing a service, you're not doing a very good job or you're losing money on the service and the market conditions are really lousy. So that's not where you want to be. So we have done this actually very recently. So this is just a few months old. And here you see the portfolio analysis that we came up with. Not quite surprising for an NREN. On the top right corner, you see Switch LAN. That's our network service. I should add that the circle, the size of the circle, corresponds to the size, the effort that we have on this service within Switch. And also on the top right, you see Switch AAI. So I think these are our main core services. But what you also see sort of below, a fairly wide range of our other services. Some of them are very new, like, for instance, let's see how we get there. For instance, some of them are rather new, like our cloud or the Swiss Edu ID that I mentioned earlier. Other services we've been running for a longer time. So the plan is that obviously this is an analysis that you have to do again and again over time. And you have to track those services and you have to understand how they move. Obviously you want to have the services on the top right corner. And if they move to the top right corner, then that's a very good service. If it doesn't move to the top right corner, then obviously you have to ask yourself the question, what do you do wrong? And it may be that you have to do certain things differently. It may also be that you may have to question the use of the service and consider abandoning it. So I now talked about our new services. I talked that we try to follow, to apply new methods also in identifying the need of our services. And now I come to the third point that I had on my slide earlier, the IT service departments. So obviously they are very, very important to us, and there are our traditional partners. Switzerland has 3 types of universities. The cantonal universities, then it has universities of applied sciences, and it has also pedagogical universities. And the universities are very heterogeneous. And of course, this difference between schools is directly reflected by the IT service departments. And they vary across many different parameters. One parameter is obviously the size. Some of these IT services are a handful of people. Others are basically an SME of 150 people. They have very different budget. Some of them have rather generous budgets. They have a lot of internal projects. Others are on a shoestring budget. Then that also, some of them have financial constraints these days because the budget of the university is under pressure. It's also the mission and how these IT departments are positioned within the organization changes dramatically. In some university, the IT service department is basically the department that is responsible for the IT of everything. And in other departments, in other university, the IT department has a very narrow defined role. In one place, it's being considered as a strategic asset. Its main value is enable research and education. On the other extreme, it could be that the IT department simply runs business services, email, file server, the network. And they don't have any additional role on top of that. And these are all our clients. So obviously you see we have a large heterogeneity. It goes on. There's also changes in personnel, and there's also changes in culture. Some of these departments are very much Microsoft oriented. They would like to put everything into Office 365 and be done. And others, they still shiver if they hear the word Microsoft, because it's not open source. In terms of generational changes, many, particularly of the large schools, they had a long-standing part of their employees that have been hired 20 years ago. They have built up the computer department or the IT service department, and they're now entering retirement age. Very often these people are, when they retire, replaced with people with other skill set. It may also be that the head of the IT department changes. He may have been somebody who came from a technical background. He's being replaced with somebody that comes from a business background. So here we have a huge heterogeneity, and we have to deal with this. Now, how do you do that? Because obviously you see that it's a huge range, and there are also different requirements. I think the starting point of the way how we deal with IT services is that we are, above all, a partnership. And I think it's the partnership that, above all, is what gives an NREN, our switch, the competitive advantage over other providers. Now, what does that mean? That means that whenever you do something, you have to also think what it means to the customer. In particular, if you want to develop new services, you have to make sure that the IT service departments, your traditional partners, do not view those as a competition. They should not see that new services are being developed at their expense. We develop them, and then we go there and say, now you buy them and pay it. And they didn't have a say in it. But I think that that's a manageable process. That's something that you have to actively manage. And we do it in several ways. In one way, obviously, if we develop a new service, we have to involve them into the development. In addition, if you have a service, you may have to tailor the service according to their need. And lastly, and very importantly, you also have to make sure that what you do is transparent, including the billing. Because nobody likes somebody to develop something if he doesn't know that he may pay it, but he will not profit in the end from it. And then also in addition, as I mentioned previously, we have a large variety within the IT service department. We may have to make sure that some services are not positioned in a university, for instance, because that university runs a similar service on its own. Or in one university, a service is positioned and offered at the university entirely through the IT department, whereas the same service may be offered in another university that, for instance, is much smaller, doesn't have the resources, but they still want to offer the service. In that case, the service would not be offered through the IT department. What does that mean for NRENs? I mean, particularly for Switch. I think in this way of working with our customers that are at the same time our partners, there are really 5 characteristics that are important. And I think that's something that I think is probably true for many other NRENs as well. Well, first and foremost, in a partner model, it's the trust. Second, then obviously you want to innovate existing services. And in addition, you have to develop new service, develop them, roll them out, as well as also consider decommissioning. And then, of course, I have not talked much about the international aspect, but international collaboration is something that's very important in the academic sector, and that's why NRENs should have an international work aspect, despite the fact that they are local. And then, of course, the national setting. So the next 3 slides, I'm going to touch on those 5 points. On the trust of partnership, in my view, that's really the biggest asset you can have. And that's an asset that you can have as NREN, and an asset that a purely commercial company cannot have. That's a competitive advantage that you have. But then when you think about what it is that makes the university trust Switch, then it actually becomes very hazy what that trust really is. And I thought about this and came up with 4 ingredients. Obviously, and most importantly, you need a good track record. If your track record is lousy, well, then people are not just going to trust you, that you're going to do it good the next time. But then also transparency and openness is very important, that people have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's also something that you have to not just say once, that's something you actually have to work on. Finally, another important aspect is that you work across the entire hierarchy chain. That's also a huge advantage, and that generates a tremendous amount of trust. Because that way, as I explained earlier, you work with IT, with the network engineer, you work with the team leader of the network group, you work with the departmental leader, and of course you also have connections into the university administration and management. Oops. So, okay. And last but not least, with trust, I think one also has to be aware of, it's not something that you once gain and it stays with you. On the contrary, it's something that you have to prove again and again that you deserve the trust. And it actually doesn't take that much to lose it. I think that's something that I think must be very much in people's mind when they work in a partnership model. In terms of innovation, I don't have a slightly different view on innovation than Clayton Christensen. I'm actually more influenced by Kahneman. And I think the problem of innovation is that it has the potential to be a big trap. What I mean by that is that if somebody invents something yesterday and today it's in use and it's very beneficial for him, then that's really great. But then the trap is that you like to be it that way. You'd like that it doesn't change anymore. And if something comes up, you may not want to have this to change because you profit from it. Why should you make it any difference? Whereas the really hard part would be to actually go back and innovate. And I think that sort of makes it hard for everybody, for individuals, for companies, even for particularly for very successful companies. It's a difficulty to innovate, particularly operational services. You don't want to touch them, they run. Why should you change them? People are happy with it. You think they're happy with it, but something else may be coming. It's also very hard to abandon existing service because you people that run the service have a certain pride with this service. They think that's the best service that there is on the world. Why should you change it? And also it makes it hard to venture into new domains. And I think that's a big danger, particularly for NRENs, because we are dependent on very few, very successful services. On national and international setting, I think I haven't talked much about the international aspect, but I think that's also for NRENs, that's a unique asset. I think that's an area which NRENs can offer things that commercial companies cannot do. But I also think here, on the international level, NRENs should also go beyond the network. They should go to higher level services. And in particular, I personally feel they should work more closely with international research communities and research infrastructures, because they would be a natural partner for those people. And on the national setting, and now I come back to the beginning of my talk, all NRENs are local, I think it's important that we focus on the core customers, on our partners, and that should really drive our work. It should not be driven by what we feel would be really nice to do. We should not follow the technical idea where we're not really convinced, and that also means market-wise convinced that what we're doing is useful for the universities. And within the national framework, we have our constraints, we have our legal setups, but I think one should leverage within that legal setup and try to turn it into one's advantage. So in concluding, I think the most important thing for an NREN is to find its sweet spot, meaning it should orient itself within its country into an area where it actually can provide good services for education and research, meaning for the universities, services where it's not in conflict with commercial providers that have means that just dwarf what the NREN can do. Second, I think we're living in a changing environment where I think it would be very dangerous for NRENs in general to rely on our existing services and believe we can run them for the next 5 years, 10 years without changing them. And I think we should also not become afraid to use some of the management tools and methods that commercial companies have, but we have to make sure we really stay in a mode which is close to our customers, to the universities, our partners. And lastly, I think we should also not be afraid to offer non-technical services where there is a demand and a need on the university side, and where we can provide this service better than another commercial provider. And on the European level, I mentioned already just in the previous slide, I think the same thing should happen. One should move up on the stack. That does not mean one abandons the network, one builds on top of the network, and one should work with international research communities and infrastructures, because these are the users that really cross the boundaries. Thank you.
So we'll have time for one question, okay, if there is one. That.
Hi, thank you for the very interesting talk. I'm Simeon from the South African NREN, SANREN. My question is around your services that you deliver directly to the educators and the researchers. Let's say in the scenario where the IT department does not act as a very good proxy for the requirements of the end users, maybe a small IT department, whatever the case may be. What model do you use for engaging with those users directly? Do you go through fora like speaking to the physicists as a group or the bioinformaticians as a group? Do you speak to them individually? How do you do that?
Well, first and foremost, I think one has to discuss with the IT department. I think it would be wrong to go and talk behind their back. And I mean, quite frankly, I think most IT departments of Switzerland, they're very, very good at what they do, and they take the users very seriously. And then it depends. I think there's not an iron rule in one or the other way. It may be that the IT department says, no, we don't want this service to be offered to those people. Those people may work with people in another university. That may be an issue that one has to resolve. It may also be that the IT department says, well, if these people really want the service, it's not our business. It's not within the means that we can support. But if Switch wants to deliver the service, if there's a model how Switch can deliver the service, of course that's also something that we would have to be able to do, then go ahead. It may also be that the IT department says, well, you can deliver the service, but we want to know what's happening. We want to know what the bill is. We want to know who is using what. I think that has to be done on a case-by-case basis. And I think the worst you can do is to run in with a clear prefixed way how things should be. But above all, I mean, the partner model is something that I would not question.
Okay, thank you. Christoph? Our last contribution is from a colleague from RMP, Celso Capovilla. He has been at RMP for 17 years, but only recently has taken up a new position due to adapting to the new changing environment, which is Business Development Manager, new unit in RMP.
Thank you. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you, Roberto. My name is Celso Capovilla. I came from Brazil. I work at RNP, a Brazilian NREN. Okay, so I would like to thank my colleague and director of the RNP, Eduardo Grisende, that helped me to develop and elaborate this job. Okay, we have some images from my country. Yes, something like that. People must be sure. In the context of the economic context in the world, Brazil is the 7th position in the ranking of the GDP, just to localize. RNP network today, this is Brazil, our network around this country, and we have about 1,000 institutions connected in this backbone, 3.5 million users, a total of 24,000 kilometers in length of this network. Our challenge is very, very, very big. RNP, among its activities, provides internet connectivity to scientific and educational community in Brazil, and so offers a portfolio of network services and solutions, and mainly integrates and develops new technology for using in the network. And to do this, we need RD process in the RNP. Since 12 years ago, we create a work group program that in partnership with RNP and academia, we develop some products, some mainly services to use in our structure. And the goal of this projects is to obtain technology. The main objective is obtain technology. So I don't think it's not my intention to discuss in detail of this project, but we have to show you in generally. Okay, this process start with the called proposals. You put these proposals you receive from the universities and researchers. After a selection, you have to construct a prototype where the ideas are conversed in this project. The objective is to create a pilot, and then experimental services, normally services are obtained in this process. And in the final point of this process, you have goods and services, mainly services. Nowadays, we are asking if in this point, the technology results are viable as a business. The first introduction of this concept in our organization to verify the possibility of the technology results to transform in a business. Before continue, I would like to show you the technology results of the program of the work groups. It's not necessary to read, but just to understand the number of the projects that provide some technology results in our institution. As I show you, this is the same process that I showed in the last slide, but aim to see another way of this process. I want to obtain innovation as a result of this process. As I told you, the first interesting in the last process, we're working in order to produce technology. Now I'm changing this concept to see the production of innovation. So I intend to put another process before to stabilize a selection of ideas. In the beginning of this project, you start on selection the ideas before you choose the partners to develop that technology. You analyze these ideas, select these ideas, make some studies, technical and economic studies in these ideas, produce a business model, a preliminary one, but it's a business model. And in this point, you start to treat the intellectual property, to analyze the possibilities of to have patents, software registration, trademarks, and so on. So we come to start that process that is really a RD process. So after I've concluded this process, you have technology results, and you verify, evaluate again if it's viable as a business. So you can elaborate a completely business model, additional development if it's required. You have to do a process in productization to transform it, that results in real products to put it in the market, and shows all the partners, the competencies and the skills that you form a partnership to come to put this result in the market in form of licensing, technology transfer, spin-off, startup, everywhere. So the important concept here is to look to this process with a business vision. So not only a technical project, but a business project. Like my colleague Christopher said, you have to look to the project like a business. Don't be afraid to have projects business oriented. Yeah. So in this step, we can study intellectual property treatment, adequate resources, marketing. All functions of the marketing can be verified in this point. Efficiency, competitive product, sustainable business, viable business project, and align with stakeholders' strategies. For us, RNP, government, scientific community, educational community, private partners. So, I will show you this figure that was this diagram of an open innovation model was proposed by Chesbrook 7 years ago, and today our R&D at RNP use this concept with the work groups generating technologies and some services, goes to the funnel, a very large selection, experimental services, and produce services to use in the RNP environment. So I'd like to introduce the concept of business. I dropped off this. I put goods and services at NRP and to market, the real market, in terms of technology spin-offs and license to external enterprise. This decision process is not necessary to detail because we have not much time. Okay. Our structure at RNP to develop all this process that I was described here. Quickly, on top, we have all the ideas and opportunities coming to the process. In the left side, we have a process to choose abilities, skills, partners, competences that you need to do your project of business. In bottom, we have a support based on our strategic plan, strategic objective, set of values, IP policy, intellectual property policy, and business policy. In the center, we have the main process to identify the best projects to turn business. Adding value business, because it's very important to aggregate, successively aggregate value to your business, to your project, and a unit to develop this business itself. And to produce something like a new business, new products, or participation of the RNP in external business. Now I will show you, I highlighted 3 points that I consider very important to conduce a project-oriented business. IP policy established is very important to any company to establish it. Analyze for intellectual property protection needs, patents, trademarks, registered copyrights, IPR's culture, dissemination among people from RNP and partners, agreement, division of the ownership of the results, technology transfer, know-how transfer, technology license. The second point is a sustainable business. In the approach, social approach, environment, and mainly economically, because it's very important to survive of the business itself. This cycle describe how can I see this economic sustainable business. We started with economical research. You put money to do research. This research generate knowledge and put creativity and enforcement. You can obtain innovation and return of the part, at least of the investment, but mainly observe to get growth, social growth in the technology development growth. And the third point that I highlighted, the process of technology transfer. Value capture is very, very important to put all the step of this process, starting with mapping result, technological result mapping for create a business, okay, and put all the results at marketing, because we really understand that all innovation appears in this place of innovation, okay, is here. Sorry about this unformatting. It was okay yesterday. So I have to describe some little stories, success stories that I use all this structure to conduce a process to generate business at RNP. This is a AGSM, a high security model. It's our first product that I describe since the beginning of the process until to put in the market, it's running its production today. I would like to show you this stories in two approaches: a technological and strategic approach, and a business approach. In terms of technological and strategic, this equipment is to creation and storage a cryptographic key in a secure environment, protection against physical and logical attacks. This is the first cryptography security module certificate in Brazil. For us, is a very big innovation. Okay, and this technology is 100% developed in Brazil with our partners, and like a white box. After the Snowden revelations, this is a very, very important to the determination of our government to have a white box like that to preservation of privacy. Okay. In terms of business approach, we can highlight this is HSM was a byproduct of a work group that I talked to last week. Open innovation concept of RD, IPR, patent and software registration in this case, business model constructed, technology transfer license. This product today is licensed to be product in outside of RNP. Innovation cycle complete from idea to market. Yes, it was made complete. The equipment is in use in Brazilian PKI. This is our innovation. The other story that I want to talk to you quickly is the CPS, a security crypto processor. In technology strategy approach, we can highlight dual core general purpose is a architecture 32-bit RISC Spark V8 is a shape like this. You can see in the photo. Is for critical application. Execute signed code. This is very important to understand. Execute signed code, protects data and all application running. Great interest for military use in Brazil. In terms of business approach, we can highlight here partnership, the best skill for searching, viability analysis was favorable. We had some government financial to do this project. Today we have a microchip in phase of testing, and commercialization is planned for next year in our country and outside. Quickly, I will show you the story of Artron. Artron is a tool, stream of digital media manager is a software tool that is used to remote management tool for capturing and distributing multiple simultaneous media streams in order to provide support for various scenarios, video collaboration. In terms of business approach, this product was a product of a work group tool, the work group program. It was a partnership between RNP and academia. Innovative to market innovation. It's quite innovation. Validation, health and culture uses, several uses, and some other uses too. Software protection by register. We have registered this software. A license process to private enterprise. Okay, we have license this technology. And a version is coming in terms of evolution this product. We have another story, success story. WebConf is a web conference tool, almost the same in terms of technology and strategic approach. And the business approach, we have to highlight the creation of a startup here by former students that worked in this project. People organized to create a startup and absorb this technology. Well, this is the story of the success, but it is very important to consider the stories that unsuccess case. Main factors of this cause effect. Let me see. During the process, you have to evaluate in several points of the process. Points you ask about the feasibility or viability to continue this process, thinking in business. Normally, when with the fail of the process, you can abort it. It don't continue anymore. So I would like to discuss main factors of these fails, just to learn. Lack of vision of entrepreneur, lack of IP culture, a lack of market insight. First, lack of vision of entrepreneur. Most of our RNPRD projects occur, as I told you, within the work groups and they're run at university, academia. Members of the development team are welcomed to have interest in create startups and license this technology. This is a fact. Knowledge of technology is not enough to create and to undertake a business. Lack skills of seeking sources of financial researches, benefits of tax incentives, and had a good knowledge of the current market to estimate a future. Knowledge is not enough to start a business. You have to have a vision of business to conduce this process. The second one is a lack of IP culture. Excuse me. Some question must be answered during the execution of the process. Who will own the technology and to what extent? How and for whom the technology will be licensed? How the economic results will be divided? What can and cannot be published during the project? What developed technologies should be protected before they are published? All these questions must be answered during the process or before the end of the process. And finally, 3, lack of market insight. As I told you, lack of market view of those involved in the project. We've adopted in the RNP business as innovation strategy. Innovation must arrive at market. Market must accept this innovation. Meet market needs is critical. Bad if not. Okay. The product's features and use technology does not meet the expectation of the customers. You have to dedicate several times to understand the needs of the client, the customer. Okay. So I think it's all that I want to show you. I captured it. If you have a contact, a QR code capture in your mobile phone, you take picture to do our contacting. This is for reading. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
We're running quite late. I suppose there's time for one question for Celso.
Yeah,
no takers?
So about your innovation process, Patrick Schnellman from Switch. We have a similar depiction of the innovation process. So with open innovation, so what we see is that initially we have some good ideas from people and successfully developed also products from it. But now the funnel is empty. So how do you encourage people in working groups to come up with ideas for services, and how do you see whether there's enough demand for something?
So now we are developing, we are working to develop a tool to concentrate all the ideas around our environment. Okay, and we have several criteria to select these ideas and to put a concentrate with the interest of our organization in directs to R&D groups to develop it. Okay. I have no more time.
Thank you very much. And well, thanks for taking part in the pre-talk in the session,
Okay.
Christoph, Dave, and Celso.
Okay,
And,
great.
I think
Thank you very much.
yeah, this is the end of the session, and I think there's